So I was gonna say, I don't know if she said. Oh, I didn't see you in the desk.
Okay, her stuff's right there. Okay, I call to order the January 25th, 2023 meeting of the Finance Committee. Welcome, everybody. And our first order of business, as we have at each of our meetings, is to see if there's anyone in the public, either here present in the room or on Zoom, who would like to address the Finance Committee. No one here, David, anyone on Zoom?
No one on Zoom.
We'll then move forward. We have two sets of minutes that have been circulated for people to review and comment on and provide any edits to. Those are for January 11th and January 18th.
Mr. Chair, I move approval of the January 11th minutes.
Is there a second for that?
A second.
Second. So Karen and I will do a roll call on that, as we're required to do. Dick,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
Carly,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Yes.
Louise.
Yes.
And the chair votes yes, so those are approved. That's January 11th. And the next one we have is last week, January 18th.
I also move for approval.
Move for approval. Is there a second for that?
Second.
Okay, seconded by Carol. We'll do a roll call as well. Dick,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
Carly,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Jim.
Yes.
Yes.
I will abstain. I wasn't present.
I
And
will
Louise.
abstain. I was not present either.
But we have sufficient votes to go forward, so those are passed as well. Okay, the minutes are done. We're gonna continue on with our budget hearings, and tonight our first one is the library. Welcome. You guys wanna come up or?
I think you all will remember Kim Hewitt, who has been here before. This is the second time around.
Okay.
Okay, take over the chair, the library. board.
Okay.
And it's tab 22 in our budget book.
Karen and I were the liaisons here. I'll do a quick intro. Cover the things, then Kim will elaborate on the points that I will make, and then we'll deal with the capital request and that'll be it. Staffing, full-time stays at 16, part-time is 36. Full-time equivalent is 27, that's the same as last year. The payroll this year, the regular payroll is going up by 44,000. There is an error in the sheet that you have in that the part-time or the temp pay is understated by 4,600. So the revised total for that is 8,125. So the combined payroll would be 1,818,634, an increase of 2.9% over last year. Expenses, 417,100, up 26,237, or 6.7%. The out of the 417,000, the three largest components, appropriately enough, the first one is books at 132,000, digital matters at 101,000, and professional and technical services at 80,500. And in that latter category, that's primarily the relationship with Minuteman, which Kim will elaborate on. So overall, the expenses for the library are 2 million, proposed 2,235,734, an increase of 3.6%. As in the past, state aid and trust funds represent additional resources for the library, and in the handout, you've got the details of where respectively the state aid and trust fund aid is being expended. So with that, I'll ask Kim to elaborate on a few points.
Sure, thank you. So the first thing I was asked to elaborate on was Minuteman and how that works a little bit. So Minuteman is the network that the Library of Needham is part of.
By the way, that's not related to Minuteman Tech.
That's right, very different. So it's a nonprofit, and it's a member-driven organization. It encompasses 40-something libraries in the Metro West area. And really what it does is connects us for resource sharing. So one of the biggest benefits that Needham residents get is instead of access to 175,000 materials that we hold in Needham, they get access to 6 million items that are owned by the network. They also, they have a small staff, but they support us in a lot of technical matters. They support us by procuring our library services platform, which is what we use for literally every function in the library, from circulation and getting you a new library card to processing the new items that we purchase and putting them on the shelf. All of that goes through that Sierra program. They also manage our, our online catalog, our Minuteman Library app that you can have on your phone. So you could place a hold on your own, you could check out on your own, just check in on the status of your account. All of those things. In addition, they do provide a lot of help in terms of group funding for things that the library really relies upon. Also access to Overdrive or the Libby app, as it's now kind of going towards. Things like the New York Times, just a lot of things that if we were paying for on our own would be things we could not really pay for on our own. So that is Minuteman in a nutshell. I don't know if there are questions about Minuteman. See? Okay, so the state aid. Libraries in Massachusetts are governed by the Mass Board of Library Commissioners. They put out a lot of sorry, I'm forgetting statutes, I guess, related to libraries and how they're operating. So you've seen this every year, I believe, and I don't want to bore you, but it is a program where we receive funding based on our statistics and our population, the income of the town, things like that, and how much the town is giving to the library in the operating budget. State aid is governed by a policy from the trustees. So any spending out of state aid money has to go through the trustee board first. We tend to do that as an annual planned spending document, where, year after year, we're spending on similar things. I think we get funding each year in 2 disbursements typically. And those go through, the process of accounting really. But so we just got our disbursement or our award for the year, which was about $30,000, if I'm remembering correctly, but that's not reflected in our state aid documents yet because it hasn't actually hit our accounts. And we are not able to spend money that we receive in a fiscal year until the next fiscal year per the policy from the trustees. So things that we use that for are paying for things like Overdrive Advantage, which is a way that we can directly impact what Needham residents get access to in our electronic collections. So if there's a very popular title and we see that a lot of Needham residents have holds on it, we can reduce the wait times by spending some money there and getting additional copies for our patrons, not a shared Minuteman thing. We pay, for Canopy movie databases out of there. Oftentimes it's used for things like that for a few years to see if it's worthwhile to keep those items and ask for them to be then funded by the municipality. We paid for a strategic plan consultant this year. That is wrapping up actually shortly. So you'll be seeing hopefully come out soon. We've also paid for things like an art appraisal of the Wyeth art that's in our building. There's money set aside for staff training because we do staff development days now, so that we can ensure that we have very good customer service and we're keeping up with different library trends and making sure that we're just meeting the needs of the community. So it can be used for all kinds of things, but it really goes through the trustees. And you should have, I think, the most recent accounting of where we're at in terms of encumbrances and expenditures. And with trust funds, it's a very similar story. Spending from the trust funds is approved by the trustees. So again, we do a planned spending document each year. That is based on the interest report that we get from Town Hall. We have not received that yet for last fiscal year, which is why you see something that looks like it's from quite a long time ago, because any day now we should be getting those numbers and coming to the trustee board, hopefully in February, to ask them to approve our plan spending document for this fiscal year. Those trust funds are all governed by the documents that set them up. You know, whoever the donor was might have put stipulations on the accounts. So they dictate what they can be used for. There's some funds that can only be used towards children's materials. Other funds like the permanent donation fund, that is, you know, those are items that are donated to us, or funds, I guess, that are donated to us generally for a specific purpose. Like if someone passes away, oftentimes in the paper, you might see in lieu of flowers, we'd love a donation to the Needham Public Library. And typically it'll say, you know, I know this person, they loved cookbooks. I want this money to be spent towards cookbooks, things like that. And so we're only able to spend, or for most of the fund, we're only able to spend 90% of the interest that is accrued each year. There is one fund that is the opposite, where we can only spend 10% of the interest accrued each year. And that's to allow the principal balances to grow and to continue to make money. And that is what our plan spending comes from. A lot of times it's additional monies for our collections. It's not super exciting, but it's, you know, children's books, reference resources, audiobooks. We also pay for a program speaker series that the trustees run called the McIver series. We pay some staff or some dues out of that for memberships that the library is an institutional member of. And we also have money set aside for conferences for staff and trustees. Okay, so the next thing I want to just give you a brief update on is the space planning study that was approved last year at town meeting. And we've just seen movement on. So myself and another trustee were appointed user representatives to the Permanent Public Buildings Committee. And we just voted on Monday night to move forward with UTILE, UTILE, as our designers for this space planning study. And this, again, is just looking at the interior space to assess kind of the needs, how they've changed over the past 16 or so years. You know, we definitely hear a lot from patrons about different things they'd like to see. And we need help to figure out how to make that work, essentially. And so it might entail light construction, maybe demolishing a wall here, putting up a wall there, that kind of thing to reconfigure the interior space. That plan, currently the work plan is such that it would be completed in the summer, with potentially the hopes of coming forward with something in the October or fall special town meeting. And that really kicks off next week with UTILE coming by to meet and observe the space, and they'll kind of start their process of observation, looking at trends of other libraries, not just in the area, but nationally. And there will be plenty of opportunities for the community to give feedback. There will be targeted outreach to specific populations within the community as well, to hear their needs. And that's kind of where we are with that. It's very exciting for us. We're looking forward to it.
So Kim, on that.
Yeah, of course.
What's the connection, if any, between that and the strategic plan? Or are they, to me, I would hope they're doing
Yeah,
this connection, because it would seem that they're entwined. So I just want to know what you guys, the plan is on that and how that's going to work together.
yeah, that's such a good point. I was very happy that they actually did end up dovetailing, because it's allowed us to do a lot of focus groups this year and really get a lot of patron feedback. So going into the space planning study, we now all have all this feedback from the strategic planning focus groups. And that is, sorry, this has not come up, I guess, yet in this meeting. I'm so used to talking about it though. The strategic plan is also happening right now. And that is in its final, well, not final draft, baby draft form. Where right now, two of the trustees have been able to review it. We had a little working group where they were helping along the way. We had our consultant kind of managing this whole process. And she is working on some edits based on a meeting we just had Monday. And then we'll be bringing it to the trustees in February to look at. But we already know what some of the big goals are there. And so what we heard back from the community about their wants and needs were a big concern about senior services and spaces for seniors to be, or not just spaces, but really the services, honestly. And services to teens was a big one as well, which, you know, we kind of foresaw when we started the space planning study as a big focus, because we have 50 to 100 teens every day in the library. And, you know, our teen room is this size and it doesn't contain all the noise or all the teens. And so they really will work together. There are other things that came up, I think, out of the strategic planning process that we'll want to bring forward in the space planning and kind of work with the architects on making sure that those are on their radar.
Good. I'm just happy to hear that the,
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, it's really good timing, actually, even though it's a lot.
so Dick and then
I
Liz.
Thinking we go ahead. Although I've got a follow-up to that.
I do too, so go
Okay.
ahead, go ahead.
You mentioned the senior involvement. To what extent would the Center at the Heights be integrated into that process?
I mean, I would see a lot of partnership potential. There is already a lot of partnership potential. But really it's things like, you know, we have all these desktop computers, they're in this open space in the library. We can't really do a class to teach seniors about how to set up an email account or do basic functions online because we don't have an enclosed area. And I think what we'd be looking for with the space planning is to have flexible spaces where it's not just set up with desktops. Maybe we have laptops at that point, so we can take them in and out to do different types of programming. So the seniors,
I mean, that specific, there are rooms at the Center at the Heights. Why not do it there instead of in the library?
that's something we actually already are have in the works and do. So we've gone to North Side, I think. Sorry, the name is
North Hill.
North Hill, thank you. To teach classes, to talk about technology, things like that. And we've been trying to partner with the Center at the Heights to figure out other ways that we can be out in the community. That's a huge part of the strategic plan is outreach. And that's going to exist no matter what the building looks like.
And the senior constituency is a very large constituency
Yeah.
at the library, as you can
Yeah.
imagine.
And it's, I mean, it's like the largest growing population in most communities around here. And so that was just something we heard from everyone at all the focus groups too.
Louise?
So I just wanted to go back into some dollars. So last year, the state aid account was at $105,000. So if we include the receipts, we're now at $125,000. One of the encumbrances last year was actually for the strategic plan consulting,
Yeah,
which is not on here as an expense.
we haven't
And-
paid her yet. She's wrapping up and then we'll.
Okay, so it
invoice.
was $7,000 last year. It's $23,000 this year. Is that gonna be paid for out of the state aid account?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Okay, so, and this is just something with respect to the state aid account. We had been working to reduce the state aid account and actually spend it on an ongoing annual basis for some of the initiatives that the library has in our annual initiatives. And I am hopeful that we can continue doing that. It looks like we're going right now in the wrong direction, kind of accumulating funds again. And it doesn't look like we're spending the money that we say we're going to spend. So last year, we already had the cameras on there. And this is why I pulled up last year's.
Yeah,
Because when I saw the cameras, I'm like, okay, I've seen the cameras already. So are we getting library security cameras? Is that an expense that is actually gonna be made? Is it gonna be made against the library state aid account?
it will be when it happens, but I think at this point it would be not wise to do it until we have the space planning study because we don't want to put up cameras in areas that we currently need. So, yeah, that would be something we would agree to do. But the strategic planning is going to be paid this fiscal year.
Okay, so I guess just in terms of planning for these funds,
Mhm.
we were really worried that we weren't gonna get them, and so as you know, I was the library liaison
Yeah.
for a very long time, and every year. We're worried that we're not gonna get our state aid again. And,
It
but I
varies.
think it does vary.
Yeah,
But I think, like, once we decide what we're gonna spend it on, we really should spend it on that and then move forward with
Yeah.
whatever the project is. We have seen in the past where it's sat for years and years. And then the funds get released because we don't move forward with whatever they're
Oh.
being encumbered
I
for.
didn't realize that had happened.
Yeah, it wouldn't have either. The security cameras, we did have a plan for, but then when the space plan study got approved, we decided that
Okay.
would be unwise because,
Yeah, makes
Yeah.
sense. No, I
so
agree.
we would, you know, and I would expect that cost to increase, if we are lucky enough to move forward with construction of any type, based on the space planning study. So that money, I would not expect to be spent out this fiscal year. However, the rest of this does get spent out year after year, so. You know, like the art appraisal just got invoiced a week ago, so that'll hit the account shortly, and probably
Yeah.
by the time we're reporting for, February's meeting.
If I may, just in, you know, since the trustees do make that decision about how the state aid gets spent, it is, we have these projects going on, the strategic plan, and we have the space planning study, so those, those are likely to generate. I guess you would say it's a little slow year because there's an anticipation of what those two things will lead us to. And they could open up needs that could potentially be funded out of the state aid money, so that's good. It's a good thing.
Are there any other questions from people?
Of the library in
Of the
general.
library?
Yeah, I have another question. Okay, so,
Beware, experienced liaison.
and I didn't get to sit in the liaison meeting, so I didn't get to ask all my questions there.
That's fine.
So I think there was a chart somewhere, I don't remember where I saw it, as to the number of patrons and who was using what. So, if we could get that for prior years as well, because fiscal year 21 was COVID year.
Mhm.
Fiscal year 22 started as kind of hybrid COVID year. So it'd be helpful to see the changes 4 years
Yeah.
prior to that, not just 21 and 22.
Sure.
And I don't remember exactly where I saw that. And I think it makes a difference in terms of your requests for library materials based upon increased demand for certain
Yeah.
items. It's like fiscal year 21 versus 22. Yes.
Yeah. So in the
you.
DSR one, I did reference numbers from 2019 as that was the last pre-COVID
Mhm.
fiscal year. And it really supported that things are just continuing to trend upwards for us. So
Okay.
print material circulation was up 13% since 2019 in fiscal year 22.
Okay,
And ebook circulation was up 60% compared to 2019. So, and then, when you look at those numbers from fiscal year 21 to 22, they're only
Yeah, they're-
increasing. So,
right.
yeah, I think we are settling. At some point, I think the e-content stuff will kind of plateau, or it'll be easier for us to shift away from print towards
Mhm.
digital, but right now people clearly really want both. And there's different constituencies that want one or the other, and that's really important for accessibility for us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question, and not that significant, but I'm wondering why, looks like your website hits went down
Yeah.
dramatically. Is that because didn't you change the website, or
They
what
did.
happened there?
Yeah, so the website, it was rolled out, I think, July of 21.
Yes,
And
right in the middle of COVID.
yeah, right during the middle of COVID. So once the library opened, that's when we saw these drops in the website hits. I think people were using it to give themselves, libraries, connect to library services essentially.
Okay,
And we don't see that now. It's still 9,000 hits a month, which is in a town of 30,000. That's a lot. So I think we should feel really good about it. It just was skyrocketed there when it was in its first year and we were closed.
And
Josh?
I had a question about attendance also. So just looking at the bottom of that sheet,
Mhm.
I want to make sure I'm reading it correctly. It looks like among the adult, young adult and child population, the attendance in the child population is the largest by far.
Yes, it definitely is. And that is something that, when we talk about the strategic plan and its focus maybe on teens and seniors, that's not at the dismissal of these other things. We're already very strong in those things. Or those areas, I should say. So children's is by far, they're doing outreach at most of the schools. They're really already living out a lot of the things that we want to see library wide.
When you implemented the library of things,
Mhm.
does that have children's things as well?
It does, it has things for all ages, and that rolled out, October 17th, and we've seen about 81 circs per month on that already, so, it's already well loved, which is exciting, yeah, and we, hope to continue to, to add to it.
One last item, there was a capital request
yes.
involving the library for a chiller. My understanding is that may have been covered now by what's the word on
ARPA funding.
opera funding.
Yes, our request has gone to the select board to see if we can access those funds for that purpose.
It's 300 and something thousand,
Several hundred.
no DSR4 requests.
Yes.
All right, something further? Kim, thank you guys so much.
Thank
Good to
you.
see
Thank you.
Thanks for all the good work you do.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for all your.
Yes.
Okay, next up is, we have DPW, the enterprise fund, sewer and water.
Harrison, Cecilia in the premises.
Very quick phone call with you right back.
It's tab 5. Full house. This is bringing your equipment. Hey, how are you? Good to see you. All right.
Okay. And on Karis and Cecilia have both been before us many times before, but there are some new faces in your team, so perhaps you could introduce the team assembled here for us.
Excellent. We have a few new faces here, some old new faces and some new faces. As you mentioned, we have Cecilia Simchak, our finance and director of finance and administration. We have Ryan Hoyland, who's probably our most senior individual now, who's the highway superintendent. We have Kristen Wright, who is a management analyst in public works. One over, we have Shane Mark, who is our new assistant director of public works. He's been with us for about 2.5 months now.
Correct.
We have Mike Gretzky, who is the water sewer superintendent, Barry Dulong, who's the director of building maintenance. And we have Matt Demaray, who is the newest member of our team, the superintendent of the recycling and transfer station.
Okay, I'll give a brief introduction and overview and then turn it over to Karis and Cecilia to give us their perspective on what's going on. The DPW is the second largest operating unit behind the school in terms of total budget. And it has a somewhat different service model than some of the other budgets, in that a significant percentage of the overall budget is for expenses versus salary. Specifically, some 40% of the total budget is expenses. We look at the other large departments, Police and fire, in each case, expenses are less than 10%. And even at the school, it's approximately 15%. So it's a very different model. So what normally drives the expenses here are staffing decisions. Here, they are also to a significant extent, expense driven. That involves a significant extent reliance on what's going on in the supply chain, and inflation in the broader community. So some of these things we don't have as much control over as we might. On the other hand, another major source of the expense charge is our decision, a strategic decision to outsource certain activities. So certain activities that in theory could be performed in-house are being performed by outside vendors. I'm gonna raise later whether or not some of these issues should be re-examined, and chatting about this with Karis the other day. There are models all over the place among our nearby communities, from total outsourcing to virtually totally do it yourself. The second question on the service model to the cost is standards. How do you decide what standards of service should be supplied? Obviously, the population at large wants everything done all at once to the best possible. An interesting example, years ago, we spent time talking about what standard of road maintenance should be supplied, and we ended up that the cost-effective sweet spot was around 80% factor as opposed to trying to get to 100%. And so I think safety clearly has to be standard there, but we also need to look at how to set standards for what the service level should be. Okay, with that sort of broad overview, specific, more granular analysis, budget overview, the base budget, staffing headcount will be flat. Salary will be up $332,000 or 4.15%. Expenses will be up $536,000, 6.6%. So the total combined base without any DSL4s would be up $971,000, a little over 5%. And this is running on the high side, particularly as we get into the DSL4 budget. While it's clear that not all of them would be approved, if all were, the salary would be up to $768,000, a 7.3% increase. Expenses would be up $639,000 for a 7.8% increase. That total again would be just under $1,500,000 increase, or 7.8%. So we're going to end up somewhere in between those two numbers, between the 5% and the 7.8%. Expense analysis, 3 areas of the expense represent 84% of the expense. Those 3 areas are repairs and maintenance, other property related services, and vehicular supplies. The first 2, repairs and maintenance, and other property related services, account between them for $5.7 million, 66% of the expense line. HVAC alone as an item is just under $1 million. So these are very large amounts of money. It's clear that the demands for COVID and the replacement and recycling of air, along with the new buildings, has driven the HVAC budget up, and there will be a slide detailing that, the elements of that. So take it away, Cecilia and or Karis.
So I'll start with high level, and I think Cecilia will go into more of the granular level. I always find it very helpful meeting with the finance committee liaisons. We're able to really dig into questions and concerns on the budget. So I'm hoping we'll be able to answer all of your questions today. I think from the big picture in public works, we've really been trying to get at the root of why we're here, why we exist. And the main focus of what our budget is covering is sort of first safety. What do we do to make sure that the people who live, work, and travel through Needham are being provided safe amenities by our department? Our second tier is infrastructure preservation. So making sure that we're doing systemic replacement in considering work to make sure that our systems are functioning when people need them and we're not getting into points of failure. And then our third mission is really for infrastructure enhancement. So that's when people are looking for new amenities or safer amenities than what we would typically be providing for a base level of service. The majority of our budget is really based off of those first two characteristics. It's really based off of making sure that we're providing safe services and that we are also making sure that we're doing strategic and thoughtful expenses now to make sure that we don't run into failures later. And then we're also trying to, I would say, match some of the community needs. And that's really where our DSR forests come in areas where we think we can either provide service enhancement or we feel like there's a demand to provide additional services. We talked quite a bit with our liaisons about the model that we have in Public Works, given that we do have a fairly expense-heavy budget compared to other departments. And that is because we do have a model where 50-50 is sort of a round number, but effectively we in-house about 50% of our services. And we use the private market to provide about 50% of our services. I think there's a financial kind of behind the scenes as to why we've made those choices. Some of them, like looking at mowing or custodial services. We know that we are not required to pay prevailing wage for those services, and we tend to be able to get contracts that are below what we would, our cost would be in order to have those services in-house. I think there's been a strategic decision historically in the town to try to avoid legacy costs if at all possible. And then there were some choices that were made probably 10, 15 years ago to consider various services and departments and really look at what had the potential to be done outside of the town. I think what we found operationally, some of the benefits of that is it's given us a lot of flexibility. So when we have either deficiencies in our ability to provide services, or we have deficiencies in the market, we're able to compensate for each of those services. So the one we really dug into was custodial services, because that is probably one of the largest line items that we have in the budget. And when we look at it, we do believe that it is still cost effective in order to outsource those services. Just looking at what our salaries would be, how many staff we would have to hire in order to provide that service versus what our current contract is. And we'll have a new contract for fiscal 24, so we'll have more data then. But even beyond that, it provides us a lot of flexibility. So if we have staffing shortages, we have the capacity to draw on our contracted services to provide additional services. And if we have a contractor that is failing to meet their obligations, we have resources in order to compensate for those resources. So there's been sort of a strategic advantage to have a blend of services and not be overly reliant on our own staff or overly reliant on contractors. I meet with a variety of communities in the area. Started off with Natick, Wellesley, and Dedham and Franklin, and we've had Framingham join recently. And we talk about the different models that we have for delivering service, and we've actually done some benchmarking. And some of the communities in this group, like Wellesley, basically do a whole in-house public works. They do all of their large, heavy construction. They provide a lot more services in-house than we do. But they also have a lot more liability because they have more staff. We have other communities that we're in this consortium with, like Dedham, which has significantly less staff and was much more reliant on contractors. So we feel both from a financial perspective and working with the finance committee historically, and then also from an operations point of view, that model is very effective for us. I think you'll see that our budget this year is a little bit higher historically than what we have submitted as far as increases go. And a lot of that has to do with what's occurring in the construction world. We have a lot of both staffing and materials concerns that are causing prices to go up. On the staffing side, it is very hard. It's much harder to find people who work in this field, whether it's the private sector or the public sector. So the same staffing concerns that we have trying to recruit and retain staff, even the private sector is managing. There's a lot of funds that have come out from ARPA and from other federal programs that have provided a lot of resources to this industry. So there's a lot of work, not as many people who work in the industry. And so there's a supply and demand challenge that we have there. On the supply side, a lot of our supplies have been significantly impacted by supply chain issues, most notably granite and granite curbing and pipe have been significantly impacted, as well as changes in the gas price has a lot of an impact on our materials when we do projects in-house or if we outsource them. So those are really the changes that we're seeing within this budget. Historically, we do like to try to keep our level budget really just tied to inflation. And unfortunately, I think our industry, and because we are more expense heavy, has been hit harder this particular year than we have in the past.
Chair.
No, sorry, James.
So, with respect to the analysis about in-house versus outsourcing, when was the last time that you actually did an analysis of that?
It depends on the individual item. I don't think we've really done like an in-depth cost benefit analysis on most of our functions. So I'll say like for paving work, we haven't gone into an in-depth analysis on our own staff. What it would cost for us to hire the staff, to get the equipment, to buy the materials and compare it to the market. We have done that with custodial services because that's one that we've recently put out to bid. And I know we did one on our mowing contract a couple of years ago.
For the custodial service,
Yes.
can you provide that to us?
Yeah, we can, we've done the, yes.
And if there have been any other comparison shopping that you've done, I would like to see the results of that. I'm not arguing one way or the other, but I am suggesting that things sometimes change. You know, having been here a long time ago, you know, there was a time when you did most of that stuff in this. And then there was a decision to kind of outsource quite a bit, but times change, things change. So I think it doesn't hurt us to have that analysis. My second question, Mr. Chair, has to do with granite curbing. That's been kind of a source of discontent among a lot of people in the town. Is that still the mandate from either the select board or the town manager, as opposed to using bituminous? So you say there's a shortage of granite curbing. Why is that still the end all and the be all?
So it's not, and Ryan can correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, but we don't have a specific mandate to install granite curbing everywhere. I know there's some communities where no matter what street they do, they always install granite curbing. Looking at Shane, because I think Newton is one of those communities. We do not have that policy or that practice. We do a lot of Cape Cod berm, and we have done other treatments. We do like to use granite curbing in certain strategic areas, business areas, areas where we're actually trying to channelize water on the street. And we want to use it in certain areas like in ramps. So one of the shortages we have is actually in the curved granite curving. It's one of the things we struggled with getting this year. And that is used as part of our handicap accessibility ramps. And that is, I believe, part of the requirement that we have in that one area, but not necessarily in the entire stretch of road. So we've used it, for example, we put it in the recent renovation we did to Harris, Warren, and Dedham, because of the type of traffic that we have there, that it's close to proximity to our business district, but we wouldn't necessarily put it in a more remote location.
So that curbing that you put on Dedham and Harris, clearly you don't want people just to be able to easily move over to that. You want them to literally have to
make the turns.
to make a great effort, or they're gonna get their tires punctured. And that was a decision made by who and for what reason?
So it's part of a complete streets methodology where you're trying to get traffic to make more clear left-hand or more clear 90-degree turns as opposed to sort of gentle turns, because that tends to be when you have more accidents. People have better view when they're looking straight on to both the left and the right-hand side than if they're coming in at an angle. And it's really to stop people in that particular case from driving directly across Dedham Avenue, straight, and to be frank, into the wrong side of the road, which is where the angles were taking them before.
I'm not a big fan of that curbing, to be quite honest with you. I think it's much too severe. My last question, unless something else comes up that piques my curiosity, Mr. Chair. Ed, how are we doing on fields and everything like that? As you know, I have a particular interest in all that.
Yeah, good evening. Thank you for that question. I'd say, you know, despite the drought and the wet fall, I think our fields have been very, very well, probably the best we've ever seen. So I'm anxious to see how they look. I do know, like most golf courses, that roots were pretty poor. The drought lasted through the heat of the summer, and again, those rains kind of spoiled the time where we kind of see good root growth, so. But this winter's been mild. I wish there'd been a little bit longer snow cover just to keep foot traffic off our fields, but every day we have a snow cover is a positive day in my book, so. And I think, believe it or not, I think some people frowned upon sodding the common in December, but I've laid sod in January to golf course projects, and it tends to root in over those winter months, and it certainly beats trying to sod in the springtime, so I anticipate that project will come out very nicely. One thing to mention with the common, it's all bluegrass sod, so again, that's not gonna look green April 1st. It's gonna take a while for those bluegrass swaths to green up, so I hope that people have some patience in the springtime, but I do expect it will look good. Thank you for the question.
And is your trash situation with Mr. Galello and the trustees, how's that's going okay?
Well, it's been a tough couple of years with COVID. The kids have been out hot and heavy, and a lot of people have been using our open spaces more so than ever. And I think that shows the value that we've shown and put into our fields. I want to commend the finance committee and DPW and others for funding the position with the park ranger. We've hired Wu Ping, that was a former employee of Barry, sorry, Barry. Building maintenance, he was a building monitor, and I'll tell you, Wu understands the why of that position, and he takes it to heart, and I think he's made a big impact already. People are talking about him. And the big thing, Dr. Healy, is after work hours, we don't have much control out there. So without that third shift in the new position, now we can kind of bring back the control in the reins. And as you mentioned, Memorial Park was always kind of the grounds that we lost complete control, because and especially during COVID, it became ground zero for the kids. I mean, we don't have a recreation center in town. So really what we have is Memorial Park and the ancillary food restaurants around there where the kids basically recreate, and sometimes they vandalize. So I think, again, having those eyes in the fields and building the relationships and having conversations with the younger kids, and we've had those with Blue out there, we're gonna see if the field's gonna be better than ever.
And Mr. Chairman, I just want to recognize there are some wonderful people in the room, but you see Ryan's still here. That's really Thank
He's
you, Mr.
promised me through the snow season.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Paris, I think you guys have the most DSR fours. I'm not saying that's good or bad, but you do. So can you walk us through them, or Dick, or who's?
I was gonna have them too, but was there some more overviews you were giving the figure, and then they were gonna get to the.
Okay.
Yeah, so just to go through and highlight some of the major increases and changes that we're seeing. Starting with salaries, the primary increase in our salaries budget is both our BCTIA and our NIPIA unions. Collective bargaining agreements went into effect this year. So there was some wage adjustments and some negotiating that caused those rates to go higher for FY24, which then also trickled down into the overtime budget. And then there is a little bit of an increase in programming for the building maintenance overtime budget, primarily looking at, and actually ties into one of our DSR fours, that on average, we have about 6 vacancies in the custodial field every single day. And so trying to backfill for all of that, if one vacancy is about 4 hours of overtime to backfill, it just takes a lot of staffing. And I will say, knock on wood, right now, we are fully staffed in the custodial field for the first time in quite a few years. We are finding it pretty easy to actually hire custodians compared to most of the other positions in the union. So looking at kind of seeing that normalize out and seeing how much we're able to spend on that overtime budget. And then going into the expenses, which is where a huge portion of our increases are, starting with the vehicular supplies. Part of that increase is just due to the cost of vehicle parts nowadays and vehicle tires and everything associated with a vehicle. A lot of people are feeling it in their personal lives, and we're definitely feeling it here. We're finally, I think, hopefully on the upside of a couple of years of delays in receiving vehicles that we had ordered, being put on hold to even receive quotes for vehicles in the municipal field. So we've had to prolong existing vehicles for longer than we anticipated, just because we weren't able to get the new pieces of equipment in. And then the gasoline and diesel prices are jumping up in price from last year. I will say our per unit cost is really what's driving that. Our consumption is actually down. So it's strictly the market that's based on that one. And then
Can you
another,
Remind us what the guidance was for fuel?
it was for gasoline, it was $4.38 a gallon, and then for diesel it was $5.48. And then I will pass these around, but it does indicate, well, I'll be touching on some of these, but the first page does show our consumption overall is down 6%, from the last year, so from our budgetary consumption. And then another huge increase that Dick had mentioned in the other property related services comes actually from the RTS and our costs for MSW disposal. Both our anticipated tipping fee, our average tonnages are up, and the cost to transport a load are all increasing. Our tipping fee went up about a little over 7%, and then our contracted price to haul it off-site also went up 5%. And those are just things that are pretty much, we go out as much as possible, where it's based on how much trash we are seeing in the facility that we have to move. And on top of that, the cost to recycle just about every item at the RTS has increased, as we're seeing an increase in the amount of items that we're receiving. So the cost for electronic waste, the cost for household hazardous waste, the mattresses that we're receiving, the refrigerant disposal we're responsible for, all of those prices are increasing. And that's just based on what we're seeing in the market. And then on top of that, we are receiving more of those items at the facility. So we matched our budget to look at the trends that we have been seeing. And then
And I
also,
mentioned, by the way, on the RTS, the Dedham facility
yes,
has closed. So increasingly, commercial waste is coming in to our facility, and we're looking at whether or not, you know, be appropriate to raise the rates for that service. So that's being looked at.
We raised that last year. That's not a new issue.
I don't believe we increased the commercial tipping fee.
No, that's the
We
point.
raised the issue.
We raised the issue. We said you should do it. That
Yeah.
If we're the only shop in town. Sorry, Dick.
But I,
And that does offset, though, the expense gets offset by increase in revenue. So even though the budget increases, the revenue should increase.
we want to make sure it's increasing
Increase,
proportionately.
right, equally.
it just won't necessarily show up
Yeah.
when I submit this.
Right, but when we look at revenue,
Yeah.
we should see a line.
And then you'll also see back to our conversation on granite curbing, and even the asphalt prices are going up, and really almost anything that takes place in the road is seeing a spike in prices because of the gasoline prices.
I apologize. I probably missed this, my mistake, but your increase of consumption in the highway gasoline is 45%.
Yes, we've transitioned over the last few years, a lot of our highway vehicles from diesel to gas. So the gasoline consumption is going up because we now have more vehicles in highway that use gasoline.
And have you found that to be a revenue positive move, even though you've increased consumption by 45%? Are you seeing that as a benefit to the town because you've changed from diesel to gas?
It's part of our green community's responsibility. As a green community, we need to look at the most energy greenhouse gas
Regardless of
efficient.
cost?
Yes, unfortunately.
Really?
So I would also just
That's
add,
a great strategy.
I would add the reason that we switched from diesel to gas had more to do with what's going on right now with the emissions market with diesel vehicles. So we had several vehicles that had diesel engines, and again, John can provide more of the science behind it. But basically, we were having issues with the emissions, the regeneration of the system. And so we were having them fail prematurely. And that's the main reason why we switched from diesel to gas.
And isn't it clear that at least currently, diesel is significantly more expensive than gas?
Yes. And then the other biggest increase is our HVAC maintenance and repairs cost, and you'll see a chart that I just passed out that touches on a lot of that. And I passed out all of the copies. I'm gonna keep
No, there are
the
more
rest
copies.
for myself. And you'll see that the budget has increased. It's broken down a little bit clearer to indicate we do outsource some of our preventative maintenance on our HVAC units, primarily the filter changes and the rooftop unit PMs that are associated with that. So you'll see the labor and materials for that PM service are about $270,000. And then the remaining 600,000 in the repair line is for when we need to call out our on-call vendor. We right now only have 2 of our 4 HVAC technician spots filled. We are finding it very, very difficult. We've had one of them posted, I want to say, for going on a year now and have not had any qualified applicants. So we're finding it difficult to fill that. And we are relying a little bit more on our outsourced services in order to triage some of the work that we would normally triage in-house, on top of just having them on site. We have 23 buildings that we are responsible for maintaining the HVAC in. Even 4 people can't be in 23 spaces all at once. And so we do rely heavily on our outside contractors. And then you will see an additional $112,000 for HVAC programming. That's the building management system, the software system that allows us to remote into all of our HVAC systems in town, regardless of what building it's there in, regardless of what building you are in, and allows us to troubleshoot and kind of make temperature changes. So if we were too cold, Barry could go in and adjust the heating right now. So it is almost $1 million. But when we look at it, I kind of break it down here by what we are getting for that based on our contracted rates with both of our different HVAC vendors, based on our contract for our preventative maintenance services. It ends up equaling about 71 cents per square foot. You get about 11 hours per building troubleshooting. And so it is a lot, but these are very expensive systems that do require this level of maintenance.
So, Mr. Chair, with respect to the budget of 983,049, I apologize, I don't have the exact figure next to me, but what is the figure that is currently being expended? So what is the comparison? How much is that going up, if at all?
From the last year budget, it was. I need to-
I think I've got that number.
We do have that number.
It's according to tab 5-8, it's an increase of $327,000.
So that's pretty big.
That's material.
And one of the questions that we actually had in our liaison meeting had to do with what the standards were to which we were trying, what were the standards that we're trying to meet, and how have they changed? Because they seem to have changed in the last couple of years, and who's making that determination? So we were asking for some industry standards regarding those. And you might still be working on that.
Yes.
Yeah.
But why don't you elaborate a little bit on that?
So I would just like, can at least talk about the standards and generally how they've shifted, and I've talked with the Mass Facilities Administrators Association, which is the organization that represents all of the building managers for schools in Massachusetts. And so this is not a unique Needham conversation. This is a conversation that's happening in all of the towns and school districts in Massachusetts. Essentially, the way we operated our systems 5 years ago, we would allow our systems to not function correctly for effectively an extended period of time. So I recall a period of time in which an elementary school did not have heat in it for about 3 weeks. We worked with the school, we managed to bring in space heaters, we made accommodations, and we were able to keep school running during that period of time. Nobody was paying attention at that time to airflow. Everybody was paying attention to the comfort, the temperature in the space, and that was really the main focus of people's attention. So if you felt comfortable in a space, people felt relatively comfortable about the air quality. I think COVID, obviously, for many reasons, put a huge bright light on our HVAC systems and on the ventilation component of it before, which really people were not paying attention to. We had all of our systems during COVID recommissioned. We had them operating at design standards, and for the period of COVID, really above design standards for a period of time, in order to get the air changes per hour that made people comfortable having their kids in our occupied spaces. We have now brought our systems back down to what is a standard for airflow, But to be frank, it wasn't a standard that was being maintained prior to COVID. And now we believe that it really is the standard that we should be maintaining in our spaces. So that really is the change in operation. I would also say that our response and the expectations of the building users is a little bit higher than it was. When there is a failure of a system, I think there is an expectation that we have a triage team, which we have put in place to go out and provide relatively quick service to rectify that issue. I don't think that it would be considered appropriate anymore to allow a situation to go several days. And I think that was the standard before. So those are the changes in operation, and we've had concerns expressed to us by building users recently, and we've been able to provide them data that ensures that we are putting resources and making sure that systems are operating correctly. And I think it's helping to alleviate the concerns of the people who are in these spaces. But we believe that we're maintaining the systems correctly, when historically as an industry, we had not been maintaining those systems to their design specifications.
As a town, we weren't, not as an industry.
I was referring more to broadly town schools. The entire field of building maintenance was not maintaining them correctly.
So I'd love to get some explanation, Mr. Chair, if I could, as to why we're seeing an increase of $300,000 on that line item.
I would also like to indicate in this, there's a little bit of, obviously the cost is going up, but there's also, I did a small restructuring of how we budgeted primarily repairs and maintenance services in building maintenance, because it's hard for me to sit here and look at, oh, in FY24, we're gonna need $50,000 for elevator repairs and $100,000 for building repairs, but I know generally how much we'll need for repairs in any sort of building. So I kind of lump them together a little bit. So you will see, while I keep HVAC separate, some of the other line items are in fact decreasing, because I was trying to mitigate the fact that we are spending so much on HVAC, but we're not necessarily spending as much on other repairs and maintenance services. So I wanted to make those a little bit truer to what we're seeing in past years, as opposed to just kind of throwing out a number and hoping for the best.
I think once we have those standards, we
Yeah.
might be able to have
Yeah.
a further discussion about this.
Yeah, but just to follow up on that point, while HVAC is going up 327,000, the whole area is going up 252,000. So other areas have been reduced. Not to say it isn't perfectly legitimate to question the 352 or 327,
Yeah.
but there are offsets to other points, as you'll see, to have 5.8.
Louise, when you mentioned standards, right? So what's gonna happen then? You get the standards and then someone goes out there and puts some sort of a
No,
device in the air and says, oh, we got this.
no, what they are instead are standards for how often certain types of preventive maintenance need to be done, what is acceptable in terms.
But what
of
about
response
airflow,
time.
air pressure and all that?
So I think we need to see what they are, because we need to have a real discussion about whether those are or are not reasonable standards. For
And they may have
instance,
been during the 2
that's
years.
what I was gonna say. For instance, Paris did bring up the response team, which was put in place for COVID.
Right.
And the question, should that survive? Does it need to survive? Who's making that decision that it does survive? And, you know, that's what we should be discussing. Yes, you're completely
But I
correct.
am in favor of heat in the buildings. Just for the record.
That's good.
Can I just ask a clarification? Because I may have understood the question differently, so I want to make sure we're providing you the information you're looking for. Are you looking for, like, so we have outsourced our filter changes now. We have a qualified HVAC person who's doing it, as opposed to what we used to do, which was have a custodian go in and change it, and then they wouldn't necessarily see all the other things and perform the preventative maintenance. And they just do the filter changes. So are you looking for like the manufacturer's recommendations of what we should be doing on the piece of equipment for preventative? Are you looking for an industry standard of how much we should be spending per square foot? I'm just trying to figure out what type of standards are you looking for?
So, yes, both, actually.
And there's a third one. I
Yeah,
understand there are
There's a third.
standards regarding the circulation of air
Yeah.
and the frequency of that. And that's an objective standard that I think When I talked a little bit about
It
Van
can be
Camps last week.
Measured, yeah.
What is Saturday, and there's a standard that apparently the schools systems generally have bought into and. I
But it might
can't
be
quote what
different
that
from,
is.
right, but it might be different from other standards.
So like the ASHRAE standards?
That's what.
Right.
Yes, okay,
Right.
yeah, we can provide that.
And the extent to which we are or are not complying with.
Or exceeding them.
So right now, we are meeting them is our standard, but I can provide,
Or exceeding,
Yeah.
right.
Meeting or exceeding, we're not gonna fall below the meeting. And there's some work still to be done to bring some of the systems that are exceeding the standard back down to the ASHRAE.
Right, right.
Compliance.
Okay, so
Okay.
TSO force.
Yeah, DSL four started tab 5-32. And there are, I think, 5 of them. And then there's some DSL five. So if you, what the first is for a custodian swing position, that's in 5-32.
this is a repeat from last year. I think we requested, and it was not funded, so we resubmitted it again for this year. I think it goes back to the conversation we had on the overtime, but it's also true for full-time staff. We have one float custodian right now throughout the entirety of the town. That person is oftentimes reassigned to a specific location, usually backfilling somebody either on a long-term issue or a vacancy. And so it's been helpful in order to make sure that we're continuing to meet cleanliness standards in our buildings, but it hasn't necessarily resolved the issue of when we have somebody who is sick for a specific day or on a vacation for a specific day, trying to backfill in those locations. It would be a person that would limit, there'd be an overtime offset, and that a person going to another building would not require an additional person to work overtime in order to cover it.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
I just have a question on the overall custodian experience here. Is that 5 to 6 absences a day on the face of 41 custodians? And is that what you've been experiencing over the last several years, or is this unique to this period of time? Because that's 15% of your labor force is out every day. Is that?
So our staff, a lot of our staff is probably at 50-50. So a lot of our staff has quite a bit of seniority and they get 5 weeks vacation. And then that's compounded with sick time. I can certainly, I know we have in the past provided a chart that explains,
Helpful.
if you take all 41 people, 5 weeks of sick time, let's say 5 weeks of vacation, let's say a week of sick time, and it kind of plots that out. So we can certainly provide that.
Thanks.
Next position is a heavy motor equipment operator. 5-35.
This is the second in a 2-year program that we had put in for last year, and was graciously funded. The labor 2 position in the highway department was funded last year, and this year we were looking at adding a heavy motor equipment operator in the highway. The intent of these 2 positions is to say restore, because those positions have been not funded for over a decade. But
It's longer than that.
Trimming down for decades.
Yeah.
to restore these 2 positions to the highway department to help them run their summer crews in particular a little bit more efficiently in managing some of the prep work that we do. I mentioned that combination approach where we have in-source and outsource services. Our staff does a lot of the prep work ahead of contracted services who come in and do paving and road treatments. It provides a cost savings to the town because bidders who come in know that they don't have to worry about certain conditions when they come in. They know that the roads are properly prepped for them. So it has a benefit, as well as we do some other small work as project work in town. We have 2 foremen who run that crew. And right now, because of the number of staff we have on that crew, we can't run 2 separate groups. There's just not enough staff. This also has a positive benefit on the winter side of our work. It provides another person who can work in our snow program. Right now, we have
essentially everybody who works in public works, working in our snow program. Many of our managers are right now in plow trucks. In order to help supplement the decline we've seen in contracted services for snow that's seen in all our neighboring communities as well. So it would have an added benefit in the winter and in the summer to the department.
And all your positions are filled right now.
So right now we have, in the general fund, I believe we have 7 positions that are vacant, but most of them are at the management level. Right now, we have 2 positions in highway that are vacant in DPW, and I believe that's it in the general fund.
So there are 2 vacancies.
There are presently 2 vacancies. One is from the position that was added to, so the laborer 2 position, and we had somebody who left 3 weeks ago as an HMEO.
And just a quick question on that is there equipment available that's, I guess, not being deployed that this person would be able to use or deploy that piece of equipment, or if somebody is trying to understand, or we need to find a piece of equipment for this person to operate.
And I believe so, but Ryan? can you-
Yes, so having those people down, we now have spare equipment. What we'd like to do is deploy it into the program. So the equipment is there, unfortunately.
But is that because of vacancies or?
Vacancies.
Yeah.
But if every current, let's say there's 5 pieces of equipment, and if there's 5 people, but currently 2 of them are vacant. If those were occupied and then we're adding a 6th person, what does the 6th person do if there's 5 pieces of equipment?
Well, right
I'm
now-
just using that
Yeah.
as an example. I know it's not the number, but
But we would put the staff that's more in the union into the equipment. Right now, we're putting managers in, we're putting engineers in, we're putting whoever we can that can drive the vehicle legally. So as those positions get filled, we'll still have a finite amount of equipment. Then those other people that really aren't part of the program could either volunteer or not be part of the program. Does that make sense? So we
Yeah.
fill everything with proper drivers that operate that kind of equipment. Right now, it's kind of voluntary, pulling people.
And everybody in our highway department is required to be part of our salt shift program, which has probably been the most active program we've had in the past couple of years when we've had all this in between weather as opposed to clear snowstorms. We have, we rely on volunteers from other divisions to participate in this program to fully staff that. The last few years we've had to have, we run 2 shifts, so that way we don't have staff working 36 or 40 hours. And the last few years, we've had to have an individual on both shifts because we haven't been able to staff that fully with volunteers. So having somebody in the highway department should also help fully staff our salt shift as well.
thank you.
Third request is from Assistant Fleet Supervisor.
We've had this request in some iteration for the last several years as part of our budget process. I think it's identifying the fleet manager that we have is functioning in a more strategic position and needing oversight on a day-to-day basis within the facility. We've had an expansion in our fleet. We've certainly had an expansion in the technological savvy of our fleet. And we've also provided, I would say, more services to non-DPW departments as far as providing guidance and consultation. And so we believe that an additional person at the management level at the garage would help provide greater management and efficiency in the staff at that facility. And I know we've looked at trying to figure out what that looks like to free up capacity from our supervisor. And we've put it in a few different ways. And when we evaluated it this year, we go through everything with fresh eyes and looked at creating a position of assistant fleet supervisor. It would be similar to all of the other divisions that we have within DPW, where we have that middle management position between the supervisor, the superintendent, and the general foreman.
Do you have that in the RTS too?
Yes, we have an assistant superintendent. In fact, that's what Matt was before he was promoted.
Next item is a non-personnel request. It's an RTS employee trailer, which sounds like it's reasonably seriously needed.
Yeah, so the current existing employee trailer is in quite rough shape. There's water damage, it's leaking, there's holes in the siding, the bathroom is not suitable. And it's also the one location on site where the RTS staff do get a break from the elements, from having their public face on, and get that actual break where they can take lunch, where they can eat, where they can rest. It is a temporary trailer. We are looking to rent a trailer. And because with the RTS service delivery study going out, we don't know what exactly the future of that facility is, so we didn't want to make any permanent decisions until we had a more clear direction, but this would at least mitigate the temporary problem until we could figure out exactly what's going forth with that facility.
I think you mentioned, you estimated that we rented for about 2 years before a more permanent solution is found.
Yeah, so it'll at least be rented for 2 years. The RTS service delivery study is scheduled to go out in March. And so once we have recommendations with that, we'll have more of a clear idea if we'll be renting it for a few more years until we do something more permanent, or we'll stop renting it at all, or whatever the options may be.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. Why is that a DSR 4 item as opposed to like a one-time expense item?
It is going to be an annual rental cost for as long as we might need to rent it, or, so that was my intent when we put it into the DSR.
Versus the DSR 5.
So it would be, so it become a permanent expense line item,
Until
Yep.
we stop.
As long as it's being rented, yeah.
as long as it's fair. So I think that's why.
Okay.
And
But it has to be either DSR 4 or DSR 5, because it's rent.
So we're renting a trailer. So it's like one of these ones that you'd see at the construction sites.
Yeah, that's what I'm envisioning.
So that they have a place to go to. There's no other place that we can put our employees. I don't,
the facility they use now is basically falling apart.
So it is
No, I
a
know
trailer
that, but-
currently. We have a very old trailer that's on the site that
No,
I,
we don't we want a trailer. Is that, but that's where we're putting our employees, in a trailer that leaks?
currently.
Lovely, that's great, okay. And is it heated? I just want to know that.
Matt, would you say it's heated?
Oh, okay. You had a big heat discussion earlier, all right.
I'm not sure the HVAC is working.
Actually, everything's good, because it's the outside air coming in.
The windows, the heat goes out, that's fantastic.
And the last DSR 4 request will be right up your alley, Jim, the Sustainability and Resiliency Coordinator.
I'm trying to get that for myself.
So we put it in as a 0 priority, which I think is a little bit confusing, but the reality is like, we put it in that way because we're not certain it would even live in Public Works. The reason we put something in is because right now my staff is being utilized to help with the town's sustainability efforts, which is, I think, appropriate, but I think it not necessarily why the staff that we have in our department was put in our department. And then it's also there because a lot of my department has some elements of managing some of these sustainability efforts. So, for example, the fleet division, which we talked about earlier, is responsible for complying with the green communities, ensuring that we're buying the most fuel efficient vehicle practicable when we purchase equipment. And there's not really one central person in the community that helps provide guidance and resources. I think one of the things we've been looking at is even grant opportunities or other funding sources that might be available. And I think on the building maintenance side of things, we had a pretty sustained effort in the community to transition from oil to gas, thinking that having natural gas service our buildings was going to be a more sustainable method forward. And then sort of, I won't say out of the blue, but net zero sort of came out and it was a surprise to a lot of us. And I think if we'd had a person whose job it was to focus on sustainability, we might have been able to maybe understand that directional change was occurring a little bit before we did. So it has a net benefit to my department, but I'm not entirely sure that that's the correct home for this position. So that's why we put it forward, but we did not put a value to the priority ranking.
I will also say that the Climate Action Plan Committee has been working on this as one of their top priorities coming out for their climate action plan. I am, along with the Director of Building Design and Construction, Hank Haff, are working with that committee closely, and so this is one of their goals.
Is there an example or a model of someone, a person who has this position in one of our neighboring towns or something like
There's
that?
quite a few,
So
yeah.
we've actually had presentations from the sustainability coordinator in Arlington. And she's actually been able to provide us a lot of the grants, resources, cost reduction measures that she was able to implement. So I think she was able to show not only did it have a sort of carbon positive impact, but it's also had a financial impact as well.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful for me to understand, to see like what the job description is, what the position is paid, et cetera, just so. We can have some sort of comparison,
And what the expected deliverables might be.
Mhm.
along with that, yeah.
I believe the town manager has weighed in on DSL4s and which ones, sorry, I've forgotten, which ones are in her recommended budget.
I believe the only one that's in her recommended budget is the RTS trailer.
And I thought this last position was also somewhere. No?
I think that's fine for next year.
I believe so.
Okay. On the DSL5s. Start on page 5-73. And these are ongoing expenses that we've had in the past. Or items such as facilities maintenance. We'll have the usual road enhancement ones that are anything unusual or unique this year coming through.
These are the same three that we've had submitted for the past several years.
So can I ask a question on roads and how does it work? So I'm speaking selfishly because it's on my road. And so Eversource was doing everything, right? And they, putting in gas lines, replacing gas lines, marking the roads up, ripping them up and stuff like that. And now that's how they stand. Are they required to come back and fix the roads and how do we get them to do it? And will it be done in our lifetime? So how does it all work? Because I think, much of myself and our neighbors are like, what are we gonna be looking at this for how long?
Definitely a point of conversation that we have quite a bit in our department as it impacts a lot of the different divisions in public works. So in what road are you on specifically?
Mason,
So in your roads.
Warren and May.
Warren and May. So they'll be doing probably a trench repair there. So they have a temporary trench there now, and then they wait for that to settle and they come in and do a more substantial repair. But we're having a much more in-depth conversation right now internally about whether or not our current requirements for road, bringing the road back to condition is appropriate. So right now, if we've touched a road and they come in within 5 years of us doing the work, they're required to do a curb to curb overlay and really make that road whole. If it's outside of the 5-year window, they're required to do a permanent trench repair, which should be something that's substantial and should weather, but we do know it degrades the road. I mean, that's just the nature of cutting into the road. What we've had a conversation with them about on Webster Street is they're looking to do some work off season, and we have a little bit of leverage because we don't normally allow people to do work off season, is trying to get them to pay for a curb to curb overlay, even when it's not in the 5-year moratorium period. So we've been talking to some neighboring communities who have done this before with Eversource. They've had Eversource basically pay the community in order to have the community restore the road. That's their preference. They don't like to hire paving companies to do full paving work. So we've actually reached out to a few neighboring communities and they have some interesting solutions that we're looking to, including looking at the condition of the road to dictate what type of service you restore. So you may have a road that's 10 years old, but it might have a very high score. And when they cut into it, it degrades the score. So we're trying to figure out ways, as Eversource has gone from just adding services in town or adding some main to replacing significant miles of main within the town of Needham, to figure out how we can keep our roads at a high level
for our PCI score. So the answer for you is that they'll be doing a trench repair, and they have to go out how many feet from the original trench?
It's 2 feet on each side, but we're looking at doing whole lanes or whole road width. And depending how close those multiple trenches would be, just clean up everything.
So are they, is your goal is to, and I'm just not focusing on Esther, because I know it's other places that say that, you know, within a year of when they do the work, the road will be back to, you know, either its existing condition before they came in, or maybe enhanced and done entirely new? I mean, is there a time, is there a time frame?
No, that's not what they're saying.
Well,
If it's outside of the 5 year, John,
Yeah,
you're gonna get a trench.
right, exactly. But when are they gonna come and do the trench? I mean, do they have?
It's usually within a year after, but we want to give it some time for the trench to
Yeah, I
settle.
understand
So it would either be in this, for that particular project, it's either in the spring or the summer, they'd be coming back.
I just think and I'll leave it at this. I just think there's an education component for, you know, we get a knock on the door from someone from Eversource, but you have no idea how that ties to the town and what the overall game plan is. And I just think, you know, for customer experience from a taxpayer point of view, that I think educating us and helping us understand what exactly it's all going to entail and what we're going to look at would be.
We have an Eversource liaison or something, do we not? I live next to Eversource and they're the worst neighbors, and I'd like that on record. Very hard to get a hold of and damaging property and everything else. But I think that's a valid point. I think we should know when the work is done, when they are on the hook to fix it, and then more transparency.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, was we just don't know. And again, I'm not saying it's anyone's fault. It's just something we can do better at. And so.
Paris, do you want to mention the monthly meetings? we just
Yeah,
had?
so since Shane has been here, we're working on getting together monthly meetings with both Eversource Gas and Eversource Electric to go through our projects, what we plan on paving, what they plan on adding service to, and then try to work out some of these issues. They are, I think, notoriously difficult to deal with, but we've had getting them all in a room has made it a little bit helpful to make some progress and get some more firm commitments. But I understand we don't necessarily in Public Works do the best job of educating the public about our role in the permitting process and what the expectations are as part of that process.
Sean, you'd be proud of me. I really laid into them a couple months ago, and I think they heard loud and clear from residents as well as workers. that We've had enough of their act. I think Shane is hot on their trail and providing that extra accountability for them and us. And set those.
Thank you.
One last item, I think,
Before one of the last item, Dick, I just want to say that you have to really be careful about what utilities say when they built a new parking lot in behind Blue Ginger. They had this wonderful telephone pole that was right in the middle of the exit road, right in the middle. I think it took 5 years to convince them that that wasn't the right place for a telephone pole to be. So I understand what you're going through, Shane. I wish you all the best, because to get some sort of synergy between what the town is doing, what the taxpayer is expecting, and what they need to do, if we can somehow bring some coalition to all of that, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, we hope to see a lot of improvement with these issues. I can tell you in my previous position in Newton, we had the same issues with National Grid as well as Eversource, because we had 2 different ones there for electric and gas. So we still hold their hands to the fire. We had these monthly meetings. We would lay out our 5-year roads program. We expected them to do the same. We would juggle things around based upon their needs, our needs. We would require them to do gas leak surveys on road work that we were doing, because we all know we'll come in there, do a wonderful job, road looks great. 3 weeks later, they'll come in and rip it up for a leak. So our intent, our hope with all this is by coordinating these meetings, we are having an open dialogue with them and being more as a collaboration as opposed to a Eversource doing their thing, the town doing our thing.
Great, thanks, Mr. Chair.
as I said, there's one item that, in the TSR fives that I think merits some discussion because it's been an issue in prior years, and that's the continuation of the land survey. Proposal is 100,000. That, I believe, is an item that the town manager has recommended be continued, and I know it's been a subject of some discussion at our previous meetings. So I think it perhaps not tonight, but when
we
we're
need to
dealing with
discuss.
these issues, I think we need some further discussion on that item.
It will be a town meeting warrant article. We had some discussion in our liaison meeting.
Commissioner, can I ask a question?
Of course.
So I asked this during the liaison meeting. So the department has a huge remit. Like, there's so many things that the department has to do. Even with this increased budget, we talked about some examples of things you still aren't able to accomplish. The example we talked about was sidewalk repair. It would take, about 40 years, I think, to get everything to a high quality state as well as ADA compliant. And that, I think we both agree that that's not really a realistic timeline. So when I think we also discussed that money itself isn't probably going to solve the issue. It's probably going to have to be an operational change to address these issues. So what are the priorities that are not fully being met with this budget, and what operationally can we change to make sure we hit those?
So I think, the sidewalk one is sort of an easier one to talk about because we've been working on the infrastructure. No pun intended, in order to try to get some clear direction and clarity on that particular issue. So we have sidewalk that we know is falling into disrepair. It's just the amount of time and the amount of money that it costs in order to bring it up to standard. So what we've lacked is, I think, clear policies, procedures, and guidelines in order to decide what we should be doing in order to resolve that issue. So sort of in the interim, we said, no more new sidewalk. We're going to deal with the sidewalk that we currently have. So at least we had some control over inventory. But I think we've just created these new committees, or the select board has just created these new committees that will hopefully create some more overarching policies. So right now we've sort of had a consistent program of funding our sidewalks at around $800,000 inflated with CPI, which gets us 1 to 2 miles of sidewalk, depending on the complexity of it. Finding out, should we be asking for more funds? And what does that do? How disruptive is that in order to add more flexibility there? Adding the positions in highway also has some benefit because we can do some of the simpler sidewalk in-house and prioritize the more complex sidewalk and the concrete work to the vendors that we work with. So I think having these committees in place will be helpful. I think, we had the conversation on Monday, so we've been sort of processing the conversation of what is our objective. Like, we have an objective of trying to get to an 80 PCI with our road system. We know, I think we're in the mid to low 70s right now, which is really good. 80 is sort of an aspirational goal, but not necessarily one that it's one you want to aim for, but not necessarily one you want to hit. And I think figuring that out for the different divisions, just like I know when we talk about our fields, it's really that GMAX testing to make sure that, the ground has enough cushion that when somebody falls on it, they're not going to hurt themselves. So figuring out what those objectives are in each division, and then where we are in terms of the service level delivery that we're providing.
So, with respect to sidewalks, we actually funded, and I have to think a little bit which year we funded a study for sidewalks, which took multiple years for us to get a document, which was actually not a study. It was just a list of sidewalks that was not particularly helpful. I don't think that was what we thought we were going to get as a result of the sidewalk study. So I think, we've had this discussion. It's been a long discussion. And I think we should definitely come up with some standards and maybe complete the study, bring it to some kind of a document that's legible, understandable for everybody.
So I'm sure I will get the name of this committee wrong. The mobility committee, I can't remember what the other words in that sentence are. But there's a new committee that's being established to set policies and priorities. And we are working at consolidating the PCI for the sidewalks with the PCI with the roads to create our 5-year capital plan as well. So that's being worked on right now.
They're setting priorities.
The committee is an advisory committee to the select board to help us set priorities for infrastructure.
All right.
So just try to summarize the issues that we, I think, identified require analysis for is the business model, and re-examining the trade-off decisions versus outsourcing, insourcing, and then the whole question of standards, what level of service. Having said that, I must admit, I don't have a very good suggestion as to how to implement either one of those issues. But I think those are issues that need to be addressed. I think the DPW, my assessment, working hard, they're applying themselves. I don't think it's a question of lack of effort. I think we've got to get clear direction, agreement as to what the standards are, and be comfortable that we have the funding to meet those standards.
Did we have discussion on this, on the enterprise funds too, or are we doing those, or?
Those are, fortunately, not my
That's very big.
left.
Did you have them, Jeff?
Sure, I can give a brief description. So sewer enterprise fund. This is increasing 1.4% over the last, I'm sorry, thank you, Tab.
Babsec.
1.4%. Total over last year, salary and wages, increasing, about 6%. And expenses, also 6.8%. Is that, as I look at this, actually, does that, the operating budget, that's what it is. The operating budget is only increasing 1.5%, which is, leading to the, its overall 1.4% increase.
But it's assuming a level fund for MWRA,
Yeah,
which
that's-
will not be. They never are.
How do you expect it to change?
It'll be 3.9%,
Be higher.
3.9% every year. It could be a little bit higher than that. Well, no, water will probably be higher and sewer will be lower.
David,
Every year, we don't have the assessment until, the earliest is March and sometimes not until May. If the governor, has rate relief. So we leveled all of that and we adjusted, as you may recall, like last year, we adjusted in the fall, if necessary. If we get a hard number before May, and before the warrant is printed, we will adjust the number. I do anticipate the water assessment. We're speaking about sewer right now, but it's both enterprise funds. The water assessment will go up because there are two things that, there are three factors. One, the MWRA budget for water is increasing. Two, Needham's share of the total water use of the overall district increase as a percentage of the total district. And the third factor is Needham's use of water from the MWRA. This past calendar year was higher than the previous calendar year. So for all those reasons, I would think the water MWRA assessment will go up. The sewer will also go up, but not by the same percentage, but it's much larger than.
And I think that's reflected in the change in the sewer budget, which is up much more, 6.2%.
No, it's not. It's level funded. The MWRA assessment is level.
I'm
funded.
sorry, I was talking about the total budget, operating budget of the sewer, of the water. I misspoke, the water enterprise fund. That's what.
I'm looking at the sewer number on 6.1 and excluding MWRA, it says the total budget is increasing 6.89%. Am I misreading this? I'm on page tab 6-1.
Mr. Chair, if I may. There are two ways that there's the enterprise fund budget, which is inclusive of all the expenses. And that is the number relative to sewer enterprise fund that Mr. Levy was referring to, 1.4%. Specifically, dollars that are used by the Department of Public Works is in the area of salary, expenses, and capital equipment. In the MWRA assessment, those combined are increasing by that 6% number. Because the debt service is level dollar, that has an effect of making the bottom line smaller, as well as the reserve fund for the enterprise is also level dollar. Neither of those items do they discuss in their write-up. But the
yeah.
BVA reflects all the lines that are appropriated by town meeting.
MWRE is more than 2/3
Yeah,
of the total
exactly.
assessment, so if you're level funding it, it almost, it brings it down significantly from 6% to.
And
Less
how
than
does the whole
2%.
issue of drains factor into this?
The drains are, the drains program is somewhat connected to NIPSES, and that's the maintenance of culverts and the cleaning and the sweeping. These were all expenses that the town would incur if we got out of the sewer business. We sold our sewer operation, we sold our water operation. Town is still obligated to deal with NIPSES and deal with stormwater runoff. And that's a general fund expense, but the actual work and the accounting for it all is in the sewer enterprise fund. So we do show you a BVA for that portion of the budget as well as the sewer only portion. And then by the way of the motion, the monies from the general fund are transferred to the enterprise fund for those expenses.
Louis?
And I have one question on the expense budget. Why are the on-call services for mechanical and electrical going up in sewer? Is there an issue with one of the pump stations?
No, it's based on the, Mike, do you want to explain what's going on with the pump stations and the level of maintenance that we're providing?
Yeah, we're in the process now of starting to replace some of our pump stations. Lake Drive is one that was on for last year. That construction is starting on Lake Drive. This spring, probably March, April. And we've had problems with a couple of our stations. Milo, Hooks Bridge station has been problematic. We've already replaced the pumps in there because of age and wear. It's an old metal can style submersible pump station. So we've done a lot of work on that one over the time. We've got to replace check valves, cut pipe, do everything and try to keep it running. Our bypass wasn't working correctly when I came in. We had to fix that also. So we're also looking at the other pumps, Alden Road, for instance. We started having a noise in one of the pumps. Somebody had like belt, like a belt you wear around your pants, down into the impeller of the pump and just destroyed it. So we're finding issues that come up. And we've seen quite a few that have come up over the past 14 months.
Okay.
So.
Thank you.
Any other question?
No, just water is increasing, part of that, the water enterprise fund on 5%. Partly is operating capital, there are two operating capital expenses, a filter air scour actuator valve. And a trailer used to transport excavation equipment, which would replace the existing trailer that's past the use for. And like with the DPW general fund budget expenses, a large increase, expenses for materials.
I'd say another huge expense increase we saw was our water chemicals. We actually had to, we previously had a 3-year contract, 1 year and extended every 2 years or every year after that. And they pulled out, they were unable to keep their pricing. We had to go back out to the market and the prices jumped dramatically. And there's been a lot, we almost had one of our 4 water chemicals vendors pull out mid-contract because I don't think we're seeing a lot of contractors not quite realize that they sign a legal document when they enter into a contract with the town. And luckily they were able to stay through the end of the year, but we are seeing that price is going up and we were unable to put a 3-year contract out. We literally had to do 1 year and kind of hoping for the best moving forward.
Okay. Okay. So we did DPW, sewer and water and trash funds. Good. Any other questions from committee members for everyone who's here? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Wait.
We'll see you next year, Ron.
I'll gladly sit back there.
And it's midnight.
But we know where to find you.
He's in Wellesley now, so.
Good job for you.
always been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
The fleet, capital.
Yeah.
We haven't had an opportunity to meet with, the lead community, so I think it'd be more appropriate to take that up when you're ready to discuss the capital budget.
Okay. We'll include it in that. So moved. All right. Then last time we have townwide expenses.
Just the
Just the,
gas and electric components, so hang on. And I'll figure out what page I'm going to.
Tab 25.
Yeah. This is a big increase,
Mhm.
as one might expect. Total budget is $5,655,000, which is up $1.5 million, or 37% over fiscal '23. The cost for the gas and electric, as you know, are both two components go into that. One is a supply component, what you're paying for the therms of the cubic feet, and then as a second, if you will, structural charge for transmission and distribution elements. So if we look at electricity, that component is total going to be up $426,000. We've got a long-term contract on that expires December of
24.
24.
Midway fiscal.
So it's only 6 months of fiscal next,
All of fiscal 24.
So-
And half of fiscal 25.
right. The contract price under that right now is 0.09 per cubic per thousand
Per kilowatt.
kilowatt hours
that's for electricity.
electricity.
That's it.
So the
Oh.
9 cents, that price, current
I
market
moved
price,
that in
that's
my
our
head.
contract price. The current market price is 23 cents.
Wow.
So that's a 250% increase.
Which we did not incur.
Yeah, because we've got it locked in place, but that's coming at us.
Yes, it is.
Gas, however, we're not quite so fortunate. Gas is up $1,151,000. That's the long-term contract that expired in November of '22. The expired contract was at 66 cents per therm. Whatever the hell that is. The estimated cost per therm for fiscal '24 will be $3.30.
Oh,
So that's what's driving these. And now
I take back what I said about heat.
we can get carried over the conversion. This all represents a conversion from oil heat. So if that's fuel oil that we don't have to buy, and all of us who do fuel oil know that those prices have been no bargain either.
Right.
So we've saved dramatically the total cost of fuel oil, but we're on a beast that is running hard. Now, the question to what extent the whole gas community is going to get repositioned because of environmental concerns is another issue, but that's not before us at the moment. The other point just want to touch on in this area is the solar farm generation. You know, we've got the solar farm going and we have a cost for producing it. We can sell it at a margin to Eversource. The projection is the volume will go down 10% as the solar panels age. That was understood when we went into the project. It was projected, and at some point down the road, it may be appropriate to consider whether we should, it's cost effective to replace them or not, but not now. So that more than covers my knowledge of the subject matter.
Can I make another-
Very good.
just another observation? So on tabs 2510 and 2511, that shows our consumption for electricity and natural gas. Over the past 5 years, between fiscal 2018 and 2022, electric usage was up 31.5%. For gas, over the same 5-year period, it was up 42.5%. So it's not just the cost per
Yeah,
unit,
it's a volume,
it's the volume, which is huge.
yeah, because it's
Doesn't that
the number of
reflect-
buildings that
Doesn't
have
that
come
reflect
on.
new buildings coming online?
Yeah.
It-
Partially, but I don't know if it's entirely reflect, I mean,
Well, think of it, Sunita Williams, and then the two
Rosemary.
the two fire stations in Rosemary, so.
Memorial
And
Park.
I'm not trying to diminish it, but I think part of that increase has to do with,
Yeah, clearly.
new buildings.
New buildings, but I guess the bigger point is, I think, conservation of energy, you know, in addition to the type of energy used is a big factor that we need to consider.
And the HVAC discussion is tied to this as well, because with what we're doing with the HVAC, we're also consuming more resources.
On the point of conservation, just an observation and a question. You know, can you or all in all the municipal buildings turn all the lights out, particularly schools, because it just seems like
As opposed to, is it Wakefield?
wait
Oh,
till the
there's
lights
stuff.
are on for a year, right? But no, but you go by whatever school, you know, and the lights are all on till very late at night. You know, so is there any thought, or is it a security issue so that you can't?
Cleaning crews in there too sometimes at night, right?
Every night.
Right,
So what time?
11 o'clock.
The get back to the subject, the maintenance crew was in there till 10 or 11. I don't know what the lights are on after that. It's long past my bedtime.
There are some lights that are on, but certainly
Not the whole building.
not the whole building.
Right.
But there was an issue when Williams first opened that they sort of like the story up in the northern part of the state. That the lights, the large chandelier lights wouldn't go off, and that, of course, lots of people remember it, one, because it's a new building and then there was glass. So I think people keep remembering that episode that we went on. It was a good year before we finally were able to get the company and the programmers to get it fixed so it's operating or it shuts down. Supposed to. But the fact is, yeah, the buildings are occupied with maintenance crews.
So, Dave, just following up on Dick's explanation. Where we are, electricity's coming. Gas, I guess we're here. So this 1.5 increase of this year, are we gonna see that next year? To the same degree or a greater degree or hopefully a lesser degree?
My assumption is for natural gas, that should level out in terms of cost. And there will be a greater percentage increase price increase for electricity in 25, but not all at once, because my assumption is the rate that we pay for supplies will go up with the new contract in FY 25, but it'll be only for 6 years, so we're basically gonna smooth out the impact of that increase over 2 fiscal years. But I do not expect the percentage increase will not be at the same percentage magnitude. There are several things. One, there is a moderation. One, we have no major new buildings now coming online, so there should be some moderation there. Two, which was referred to earlier in the discussion about the HVAC and air handling units, is the high intensity use of the last 2 years has been moderated some. So we should see a moderation in terms of total use, electrical usage at buildings. There's likely to be some stabilization in terms of the natural gas rate, not only for the gas that we purchase, which we use for heating several of our buildings, but also public utilities who have closed down coal fire plants have replaced them with natural gas, and their cost to purchase is been driving electrical prices. Most of the industry is saying that there should be extra gas supplies, better capacity, get natural gas into New England in the 2025-2026 period, which should help to moderate. That's a long way of saying I do not expect the same percentage increase in 25 that we're looking at 24.
Good, thank you. Any additional questions then on the townwide expense with respect to, gas and, light and electricity? Okay. So that concludes what we have for our budget hearings tonight. Next week, we will be finishing. Correct, Louise?
Yeah.
And then the goal will be the following week to see if we can be in a position to have our discussion and, on the budget and, our recommendation and hopefully to vote, if not that Wednesday, the following one. That makes sense to people? Any, updates anyone has or,
Yeah, brief report from the school enrollment discussion meeting yesterday. On the conclusion that came out of that is the probability is that we will be at or slightly above the classroom model attendance. The school department has number of students that they want at or below that number. Projections are that we're going to be at or above those numbers somewhat, not dramatically, for the foreseeable future.
And in concrete terms, I think they also, the message was that it's enough, or maybe an addition to some or multiple schools, but there's not a foreseen need to add an additional school entirely.
That's good.
And you're not, since I didn't listen to the meeting, but I looked at the numbers, so at least they provided in the handouts that Louise sent around a best case scenario and a high case scenario. Does the best mean likely to happen?
Yeah, most likely.
Okay,
yeah, I think it's a poor choice of term.
Yeah.
Best and high is
It's,
confusing.
I think best stands for his best estimate.
guesstimate, so
Yeah.
most likely.
Yeah.
But if you still look at it with what the, with what the reduction was during the COVID time. We're still not gonna get back to what we were
Yeah.
in 2018 and 19, so. I understand that they're saying, their formula and everything,
Yeah.
but the fact is, we housed everyone and we serviced
Yeah.
everyone and we taught the students well in 2015, 16, 17, 18, and 19. And we're not projected to get to those numbers for a long
Exactly.
period of time.
And did they factor in any new kind of housing initiatives in town? So anything,
Yeah.
any
Look,
effect
you
of the
looked at the
MBTA
probability, yes.
community?
It had about 26 assumptions.
Yeah, there's a lot of assumptions,
But
but
in
But I
terms of
didn't
new
see-
housing,
That's why I'm asking the question, but I didn't see anything with respect to, implementation of MBA communities and how that might
No.
impact.
no, that was, they did not.
No, I saw interest rates stay the same, or they only go up by a little bit. Housing prices, it was remarkable how many assumptions they had, frankly.
Yeah, what the key driver is all this is, since the fertility rate is below replacement level. The key to to enrollment is new families moving in. So it's the volume of house turnover.
Right.
Which then is driven by, among other things, the economic conditions, which is, and he's assuming interest rates, mortgage rates stay between 5% and 7%
Right,
for the foreseeable future.
right.
But that nonetheless, within
And
that,
inflation,
they don't
yes.
expect any significant decline in the velocity of house sales in Needham.
Right.
I think he also said that the velocity of house sales or the volume of house sales was one of the more uncertain assumptions.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And-
if it
and-
goes-
There was a question, said if you were wrong, what are the probabilities you're wrong on the high side or wrong on the low side? He said, the probabilities I'm wrong in the lows, that it'll be lower than higher.
And in terms of, I think, housing, new housing developments, I think the only assumption was in the mixed use overlay districts over by Wexford Street. Where you can have up to 250 units and the high case rates, all of those would be built in.
Okay.
Thanks, Andy. Anything else anyone have? Okay, so then I think I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second for that?
Second.
Seconded by Karen, and we'll do a roll call on that because we need to, I think. Louise,
Yes.
Dick,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
Harley,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
Karen,
Yes.
Chair votes yes. We're adjourned.
I got what you